Assassination.org and the Neapolis Media Group proudly present to you the Lone Gunman Podcast, featuring your host, Rob Clark, where research comes to shine and myths come to die. Stay tuned. Be right there.
Oh yeah, what's up everybody? Welcome to the Lone Gunman Podcast. This is your host, Rob Clark. This is episode number 148. And I've got a great guest for you returning to the show. It's been a while. I bet everybody thought something happened to this dude. Unless, of course, you're listening to him on another radio show. But he's back here today with me, Mr. Carmine Savastano. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. Good to be back on the Lone Gunman Podcast.
Oh, man. It's been a while since I heard that voice on here. What you been up to, man?
The usual, diving in, trying to have a look at some of the new JFK files and, looking into the RFK and MLK cases when I get a chance.
Yeah, I was slacking at the beginning of the year a little bit, getting in that little funk, but I'm back out of it now, getting back in the swing of things.
Oh, I understand. It can get, everything, when you're looking at so much different stuff and trying to put everything together, it can get tedious. You need a break every once in a while.
Yeah, and I've got all these podcasts going on. I might be spreading myself a little too thin, but we'll see how it's going. You're
getting it done. That's a good thing.
I'm trying to get it done. Yes, it's a busy life, but I'm enjoying myself, so that's all that matters, right?
Yep.
Sweet. So Carmine, just to remind everyone, is the proprietor of the Neapolis Media Group, which can be found where?
It can be found at tpoc.com under the NMG section, and that's you can also find the primary evidence collections where we have a big offering of evidence there. You can find my book, Two Princes and a King, and they can also locate your website, Chuck Ocelli's website for the Ocelli Effect. You can look at Debunked blog. We have a whole bunch of different resources people can look at. You can check out recommended play page where you can see the Mary Farrell Foundation, the Assassination Archives Research Center, and the National Archives, because as you know, there's a ton of stuff coming out, and we're probably gonna have to wait another few years to get any more. But we've got millions of pages still we got to go through. So,
oh, I know that. So yeah, if you're interested in the subject of the JFK assassination, the RFK assassination, the MLK assassination, highly recommend tpaak.com. It's a very broad and I guess easy for beginners to kind of step in and get their toe wet and kind of figure out what's going on. I would say, and especially reading your book as well. Your book is laid out really good for people that are new to the case to get an understanding of it.
Thanks. Yeah, no, that was, I was hoping to act as almost a primer, just to get people involved, to see and let them come to their own judgments. That's why I have the multiple, like, as you know, I tried to offer some possible names, but I didn't set anything in stone because we shouldn't. We don't have that.
It's still a fluid situation going on,
Exactly. And there's still so much evidence that's being withheld. I mean, even after they dumped a good almost 100,000 files, 100,000 files on us in the last year, there's still so much more to be.
It's like a bottomless pit, man. Stuff just keeps coming and coming and coming. But, I mean, really, not a whole lot new and definitely no smoking guns. So we're still digging.
Yeah, the occasional gem, but yeah, unfortunately, what it seems to be is, I can't remember. We might have been talking about it, but I can't remember. I probably had the conversation a couple of times, but I remember having the conversation of they basically had two methods that they could do to try to block progress in this case. Officials did. One was give us nothing, which doesn't work because then there's a huge public outcry and you're basically just lending credence to it. So. Give us too much, I think is what they're doing.
Yeah.
Just re-releasing the same things, except this time with redaction, so it looks a little different. Like, just the controversy, and think of all the fake controversies that were started. Like, I remember having a conversation over There was that one thing they released, which was Richard Helms' testimony, which is, I believe, the Church Commission of the House Select Committee. And the testimony cut off right where it said, "Is Oswald a CIA agent?" And people like Alex Jones and the media went nuts. They're like, "Oh my God, it cuts off. They didn't want us to know what the real answer is." Well, the real answer is that I believe it was Rex Bradford at the Mary Farrell Foundation let out was that stuff's been available in full for a while. So we know what the answer is. And honestly, did you really think Helms was going to be like, "Oh yeah, he works for us.
Yeah.
He's an agent"? That wasn't going to happen.
No, definitely not going to happen.
And what's hilarious is he later got charged with perjury by Congress. So that guy definitely wasn't going to tell us the truth.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Yeah. So yeah, unfortunately, the way that they've been doing the release, I don't think is necessarily unintentional. I think maybe somebody in the chain wants them. I mean, you can see too that as where, we get lucky with places like the Mary Farrell Foundation or the Assassination Archives Research Center or the Weisberg Archives. Usually it's just a single document with a number, RIF number that you can go off of. So it's fairly easy to track. Well, what they're doing is releasing like entire files. So it's a 200-300 page document of just dozens of different files that should have different numbers, but they're all under one number.
Yeah, and what pisses me off is if you go to NARA and look at these new releases and everything, you have no idea what is in there until you actually click on the PDF and look at it.
Exactly, not searchable like Mary Farrell.
They had 25 years to set this shit up and classify everything and do it in a decent manner that could at least be titled so you know what's in the file, if not searchable, like you said, which would be ideal, which thankfully the blackvault.com is doing to the new files. They're making them searchable. So,
yeah,
if it wasn't for them undertaking this, crazy thing, it wouldn't even be possible to search them. You'd have to go through one by one to try to find that needle in a haystack.
Yeah, we're really lucky to have, places like the Black Vault, like Mary Farrell, that will go in and do the technological work that's needed to make it a lot easier. Because otherwise, what I've been doing and what I assume everyone else has been doing is one at a time.
Yep.
Just next. And then
you get discouraged and you say, "All right,
files.
Screw this. I ain't doing this no more." Yeah.
Yeah. Well, me, I'm a glutton for punishment, so I haven't said that yet.
To keep flogging yourself on the back with that stick.
Well, and some of them, I really do think as you get more familiar with them, you learn that you can just skip over some too, because some are, like, for instance, card files and stuff like that. Unless you think that's going to be the magical one that has a line you're looking for, a lot of it is just notations and. Yeah. Not to say that there's not going to be a gem occasionally, but for the most part, yeah.
Thank you, sir. May I have another?
Yeah, exactly. Wow, I really enjoyed reading about that's another thing that annoys me is when they do multiples of the same. So it's like, okay, same document.
What is up with that? Like you get 3 different pages and then it repeats itself 3 more times for a total of 15 pages in a file, but it's duplicated 5 times. There's 3 pages. It's like, what's the point?
Exactly. Wasting time, apparently.
Yeah, definitely. Anyway, Carmine.
Okay, anyway, sorry, but I hope everybody doesn't mind that we went off a little bit there on
we needed to get that off our chest for sure.
Yeah, but I do think that there is some decent, there's been some good cryptonym information that, Bill Simbich has found a ton of them. John Newman, Jefferson Morley found that one the other day, and Richard Gibson. Did you hear about that yet?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. So Gibson, that's another, I think it's hilarious because I think it was Matthew Shuffley that put up something on social media, and Steve Rowe commented, and we all agree that it's crazy that it was no other press besides what Jefferson Morley put out on that. This is another CIA connection. This is another person who's molding Oswald into the patsy that has a definite CIA connection. Another journalist.
Yeah. And we all know about Operation Mockingbird, and they just keep coming,
Yeah. I mean, so we've got him. We've got Priscilla Johnson McMillan that we discussed on the last show. We've got, what's his name, Ed Butler at Inca. So, I mean, how many connections are required until we have officials or people who might not agree with the idea of a conspiracy that this is becoming more realistic? And now the evidence is turning. It isn't the clear case that officials had when so much was hidden. Now that so much has been released, I think things are turning. The weight of history is turning towards conspiracy.
For sure. I mean, people always speak about showing a preponderance of evidence. Well, here it comes,
Hmm.
people.
Yeah, and it's getting stronger. And I think
Yep.
that's why you see that. Not everyone. Like I said, Steve Rowe and others that you've had on here. I think that though we might not agree on conspiracy, they're reasonable people. I like to have conversations with them. I think that they contribute good research, even though we might disagree. But you have another wing of people who support officials that are basically just out there trolling, just
Right.
saying still, it's crazy, you're kooks, the basic lines that have been said ever since the
Right.
60s.
And people like Steve and Fred, they don't just dismiss everything out of hand. They're willing to be convinced.
Yeah,
But just right now they're not convinced of a conspiracy. But given the right evidence, they could
yeah.
easily say, okay, it's just people like that are in search of the truth of what happened. They're just unconvinced at this point of a conspiracy.
Well, and we also have, unfortunately, like we've discussed before, people like Baker and the myth makers
Yeah,
who
which
are out there
don't help.
poisoning the well. Yeah,
Yeah,
they're making people like Fred and Steve not want to hear what anyone has to say who supports a conspiracy because they have people spouting ridiculous things all the time.
yeah, yeah. Yes, they do. And it just doesn't stop. It doesn't stop. But hey, look,
Fighting on two fronts.
yeah. Now the reason I wanted to have you on the show, um, well, you're Italian, and
Nice.
you might be connected. I don't know, um, but if you are, I'm glad I know you. So
As my no used to tell me, the mafia doesn't exist. Tell your friends.
that's right. But yeah, I wanted to talk about something that I've never ever talked about on this show before, and that would be the whole mafia conspiracy surrounding the JFK assassination. And the reason I've never talked about it before, it can get a little confusing. And I'll admit I dismissed it out of hand a long time ago. Okay.
Hmm.
But let me put this caveat out there. The whole catalyst for me wanting to do this show was another podcast that I heard. And anybody can go out there and listen. It's called Mafia. And it's made by the people over at Audio Boom, which is a podcast network. But you can listen to the show Mafia. I believe it's on iTunes, Stitcher, anywhere you can hear, podcasts. So I would recommend that everybody who hears the show and wants to learn more, head over to or just find the show Mafia on any podcast place and give the episode about Sam Giancana a listen. It's very, very interesting. And when we're talking about organized crime, I mean, we all know, the basics. We know that um, Bobby Kennedy was going after them hard when the FBI wouldn't. Back in the early '60s, we've all seen the tapes of him going after Hoffa in the Senate hearings and going back and forth, and he was trying to nail him to the wall. Now, what's odd about that is, of course, J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI weren't really too concerned about what the mafia was doing back then. Now, of course, people speculate, well, maybe the mafia had some dirt on J. Edgar Hoover, and I believe part of that probably is true. Um, Compromising photographs, for instance, which I've heard actually existed from people that claim to have seen them. But of course, we'll never see them. We'll never know. Um, but when we're talking about the JFK assassination, there's several prominent mafia figures that we want to kind of figure into the mix here. The first one being Santo Trafficante, the mafia don of the Florida area, Miami.
Yeah,
Um,
Tampa.
yeah, Tampa. He had a lot of interests in Cuba before kind of Castro took over and eliminated all of the gambling businesses. Castro even put him in prison in Cuba. Um, he was in prison with people like Lauren Hall and Alexander Rourke and what's the guy's name that was doing wiretaps for the
Robert Mayhew.
no, he was doing wiretaps for the CIA. He oh man, damn it. What was his name? Christian
Sorry, I don't know.
David Christ.
Oh, David. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
David Christ. Yeah, he was the head of, I believe, the technical services division at one point.
Right. So you have the guy that basically wired the U.S. embassy in Mexico for sound. You have a mercenary, and you have a CIA pilot, all in prison with Santos Trafficante at the same time. And you have stories of Jack Ruby, going down to Cuba and possibly visiting Santos Trafficante in prison. Okay. And then you have all of these anti Castro Cuban activities going on around southern Florida. And all the mercenaries kind of hanging out down there in southern Florida. So then we move over to Louisiana, where we have Carlos Marcello, who's the Don of the southern part there, Louisiana, Texas, things like this. And he's very close to New Orleans, which happens to be where Oswald spent some time. He has definite connections to people like David Ferry and G. Ray Gill. And then we move on to Chicago, where we have Sam Giancana, who actually liked to think that he helped his old buddy Joe Kennedy to get his son elected president. And of course, there was some problems with some females that may have been shared between JFK and Sam Giancana. But listening to that mafia show, it's pretty convincing that they were pissed after the election when they had helped JFK get elected. And then here comes Bobby Kennedy, with a hard on after all these organized crime guys. They were not happy, Carmine.
No, I definitely agree that they weren't happy. Now, I don't know if I necessarily agree with what the show proposed as being the answer, that they are likely suspects for the murder of JFK based on that, but I definitely think that Bobby Kennedy's prosecution of them, and I think that a lot of people don't realize, I'll go into it more later, but the Kennedys were both on the McClellan Committee, which in 57 was going after the mafia. So these weren't like allies turned enemies. These were always enemies, which is what makes it for me harder to believe about the election thing. I'm not saying that it's impossible, and I'll go into some of the stuff that the Mafia podcast said about it, but I just think that it's unlikely that, one, if the Mafia did it, I don't think they influenced the outcome of the election. I think he still would have won. Giancana had a lot of control over Cook County and a lot of the outlying areas, but JFK was carrying a lot of Chicago. That was the important one. Without Chicago, you couldn't win. It didn't matter what the Mafia controlled.
Right.
So
I mean, that's
he needed
something that you're not gonna be able to prove one way or the other. It's just he might have thought he helped.
Exactly. Or even it was he might have. Exactly. Yeah, I think that there's just so much interpretation, and it's so much, even with the people on the podcast, we're just saying, well, that's my opinion.
Right.
It's like, well, that's great, but that doesn't really prove anything.
Right. And then, to go back to the New Orleans for a second, I just did a show with Doug a couple weeks ago where we were talking about Thomas Beckham and his HSCA testimony and all that, and him implicating Carlos Marcello as being, part of that whole deal that he described down there, which is interesting because, when you think about the assassination for a second, if you're going to pay, assassins to murder the president in broad daylight in the middle of a big city, either they're going to do it out of for ideological purposes. You know, either they're going to do it for ideological purposes and conviction, or they're going to do it for money. One or the other. You know, and here's the thing: who was capable of financing an operation like this? And that leaves very few suspects. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. For it to be more than just a ragtag sort of a plot, I agree. And if you want to go a little bit into Giancana's background, then we can jump around to some of the others.
Sure, let's do it.
So let me give everybody a real quick biography. So to familiarize everyone with these individuals we're discussing, I thought I'd offer some background subjects on Giancana. I thought we could also discuss a few of the enduring claims. So Sam Momo Giancana was born Guillermo Salvatore Giancana during 1908 in Chicago, Illinois. His parents were Sicilian immigrants, and the family lived in the slums of Chicago's West Side. After a childhood spent in local gangs, acting as a minor courier for local gangsters associated with Al Capone, he eventually rose to the lowest rungs of the criminal underworld. He reportedly graduated to grand theft and murder before he was 20, but was never convicted of those crimes, and this would affirm those who noted his savage temper and his antisocial behavior. During the 1930s, Sam married his wife and they had 3 kids, and due to the weakening of Al Capone's control of the Chicago Mafia, opportunities began to emerge that allowed Giancana to rise in its ranks. He, via intimidation and murder, expanded his control of the gambling rackets and was a millionaire in the 1940s. He became mafia boss of Chicago in the 1950s and assumed near total control of most criminal operations, from rackets to narcotics. In 1957, the McClellan Committee was investigating the connection between the mafia and labor unions. Among the members of the committee were Senator John F. Kennedy and Department of Justice Attorney Robert F. Kennedy. The 2 Kennedys joined the committee members in grilling mafia leaders and associates on their illegal dealings. A notable exchange discussed in the Mafia podcast within Robert F. Kennedy and Giancana had the mafia leader laughing as he repeatedly asserted his Fifth Amendment rights to refuse to answer. Annoyed at this obvious attempt to stonewall the committee, Robert F. Kennedy questioned Giancana laughing and told him that only little girls giggle, seeking to incite Giancana's notorious temper. However, Giancana resisted and kept his composure. Now, I hear a lot of people often cite that one as, proof that Giancana was directly involved, which I don't think it is. But you definitely see the animosity between the 2 of them.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that, and it's interesting theater. I mean, you don't see that rarely. You see, something so direct where there's an official directly trying to get them in front of everybody, in front of the cameras in the world. Yeah. So now something a lot of people don't know about is the FBI had begun a surveillance campaign, an illegal one in some cases at the time, on Giancana at the Armory Lounge from 1959 until the mid-1960s. So during the Eisenhower administration in 1960, Robert Mayhew contacted mafia fixer and hitman Johnny Roselli, and other Central Intelligence Agency officials contacted Chicago mafia leader Sam Giancana and Tampa mafia leader Santos Trafficante. Fidel Castro was a common enemy of the U.S. government, and the mafia and some of the CIA believed that the criminal syndicate was a useful tool in dealing with him. Having designed general assassination plots a year prior, the agency sought to use criminals who could assume the blame for the official agenda. However, the mafia leaders were not as eager to sacrifice their own people and suggested other means of killing Castro. After a series of failed attempts, the agency ceased contact with the mafia and all the mafia leaders except Johnny Roselli. The entire matter would be a cause of great concern years later to Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, when the FBI revealed it to him. So I think that is definitely that is a verifiable connection. I'm not saying that equates, because I don't necessarily think that the mafia is directly involved for the plotting and other things we'll go into, but I think that at least we can verify there is a definite connection between the CIA that the CIA initiated foolishly, in my opinion. And this is one of the reasons why I'm so hesitant, because you always hear people say, well, it had to be the CIA, it had to be the No, it didn't. But because they were doing these peripheral operations, because they wanted to kill Castro so bad and were making these bad judgments, they allowed themselves to be linked with the criminal syndicate. If anything happened as a result of that, they're linked. Not necessarily that they were willingly part of it, but if they trained these mobsters, or if they gave them the information they needed to get it done, then in some ways they are responsible. Not by their own will, but by having that link to them.
Or even the suggestion to get involved and do something about it. Because when we talk about each of these mafia leaders, they all had their own reasons for wanting the Kennedys out of the picture.
Mm-hmm. The question is, it's because one of the things that G. Robert Blakey, who is the former lead counsel for the House Select Committee on Assassination, says in the Mafia podcast is that, they had planned to do it. They had a discussion prior about possibly killing off Kennedy, but they decided not to do it because of the heat. And that's something I think we always have to balance out, is what was going on at the time. Are the circumstances, is there already so much attention on them? Are they going to risk even more? Should things fail too, are they going to risk having their entire life destroyed and their empires taken away?
Yeah, but I think either way would give either side plausible deniability based on who they would use.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know, they could have, because I mean, look, guys like James Files claim mafia connections.
Yeah.
But you know, if and this is a big, huge mother effing if James Files was on the grassy knoll shooting and he got caught that day, and he tried to say, well, yeah, I know Chucky Nicoletti and I know Sam Giancana and I'm part of the organized crime, they would have been like, sorry, dude, we don't know who the fuck you are, you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I understand they totally deny, but like one of the things, like with Roselli, because Files tries to put Roselli there the day of that he went and had picked him up from the airport or whatever. Well, the problem with that is that, we can track Roselli to being in California or Las Vegas on the 22nd.
Right.
So Roselli wasn't there.
Yeah. Well, he's not the only one that tries to put Roselli there.
Oh, yeah. No, you can pull the string in a lot of myths on that, because Roselli is not there. Sorry, guys. And there's no reason, once again, or Nicoletti. A lot of people try to put Nicoletti there. Well, unfortunately, what they don't realize is that at the time, Nicoletti was under investigation for a murder that happened in Chicago. So he wasn't leaving town.
Right.
He was being watched. So it doesn't make sense. Once again, you don't use famous or infamous people to do this. You might use someone who is evil and a killer and everything, but you probably don't want to use the top guys who are known to so many people, especially when some of the circumstances going on.
Those guys are not going to risk getting their hands dirty when they can easily tell somebody else, here's what I need you to do. You know?
Yeah. It's going to be a largely nameless, faceless person that can be expended easily afterwards that nobody's going to miss. Those are the sorts of person. People always talk about, too, the best shooters in the world. I don't think they would have used the best shooters in the world. I think they would have used the fourth best. Someone who could get the job done, but wasn't really well known.
Exactly.
Anyway, so jumping back into so the FBI was monitoring Giancana at the time from basically his base in Chicago at the Armory Lounge. And so they were plotting, and some of the evidence that I'm going to send to Rob that he can include with it is, I believe it's 20, maybe more documents that I gathered on the Castro plot. So if people want to get into it to actually look to see the interactions, who was involved.
Yeah, it'll be in the show notes, people.
And so, but later on that would concern Robert Kennedy, and I think that Hoover kind of held it over his head. Because it basically was started in the Eisenhower administration. This was Richard Nixon and Eisenhower's doing, the original, giving the CIA the go-ahead to come up with a way to get rid of Castro. They wanted to get rid of Patrice Lumumba too. But
and they did.
They helped facilitate. You know what I mean? That's always the excuse. It's like, well, we didn't kill him ourselves. We might have greased the wheels to get the thing done. But, I think in that case, with Lumumba, they just told his political enemy that he was plotting against him and let him take care of it.
Right.
So additionally, in 1960, while the FBI surveillance is going on, while the plotting with the mafia and the CIA is going on, John F. Kennedy is running for president in a close electoral contest. And this is another one of the big stories that, a lot of people largely rely on for the mafia idea. And I think that there are some problems with that because rumors of, ever swirled that the alleged Prohibition era connection of Joe Kennedy and Sam Giancana allowed the Kennedys via Frank Sinatra to steal the election for Kennedy. Yet the narrative used in such claims, I think, is flimsy, and it relies largely on the word of people who lied professionally. We're largely relying on former criminals, and we're largely relying on people who – this is second and third hand accounts, basically.
Right.
So while I don't doubt such a meeting could have occurred, and Sinatra and Giancana might have sought to curry favor or protection from officials by interfering and aiding the Kennedy campaign, I don't believe it was their efforts that carried the day, like some people say, because some people say, it was so close they had to have the mafia. I don't believe that. I don't think that, and as you'll see why in a little bit. I'm going to hopefully it'll be new for most people that they might not have heard of at least this factor to the issue. So I don't believe their efforts carried the day, but I don't support that John or Robert Kennedy would have agreed to such a move. They put it on Joe because they know that it's almost impossible that JFK or RFK would have wanted to be associated with the mafia directly.
Right.
So, they're saying it's Joe, and okay, so Joe is, definitely less ethical. So he's supposedly the one that's making this deal with him. But I think I think even Joe Kennedy, he was a strategist. I mean, he did finance and largely help get his son elected. It was Joe Kennedy that basically helped him get elected. Without that huge war chest of money, he wouldn't have gotten elected. So I think Kennedy
sidebar, Carmine.
Yeah.
Did you see the new movie Chappaquiddick that came out recently?
No, did you?
I did.
How is it?
Not a very positive portrayal of Joe Kennedy during that time.
No, I have yet to see a positive portrayal of Joe Kennedy.
I mean, it was almost like wow, but yeah, interesting movie for sure. And I don't know what the exact truth of what went on down there was, but it basically dealt with the aftermath. Basically how Teddy dealt with the aftermath of the situation and trying to cover it up and then having to face the music and all that. But it was a pretty good movie. I would recommend catching it on DVD or something.
Okay, yeah, no, I'll have to check it out. Yeah, and if it's largely, it's drama, so it's not going to be 100% accurate. But if it's largely accurate, that's fine. It's a drama. As long as they don't try to skew the facts, that's all I care about. Yeah, with Joe Kennedy, there's a lot of questions. You're right, though, with Joe Kennedy. I mean, it's, you got people ranging him from rum runner, which I don't necessarily agree with because there's a lot of evidence to show that. I would lean more towards he was a dishonest Wall Street guy.
Yes.
If I were to look for his dishonesty, it would be in the business deals he made rather than that he was, some great big rum runner, hanging out with mafia people.
Yeah, and really, I guess, power hungry, through his children anyway.
Yeah.
God, for sure.
Well, I think he realized that he had politically, destroyed himself so badly with some of his moves in trying to help appease Hitler overseas that he knew that he would never get elected.
Yeah, it's just crazy that one man would have these four sons that rose to such great things. I mean, Joe, of course, Joe Jr.
Yeah, he was on his way too.
He was on his way too, but he got taken out, and then JFK, RFK, and Teddy, and yeah, it's crazy. But the way they portrayed him in the movie was very I'll take care of the situation. I mean, basically he was at this point in Teddy's life, I guess in the late 60s. Joe was definitely chair bound.
He had the stroke by then, I think.
Yeah, he'd had the stroke by then, and but he could still backslap the shit out of Teddy. He said, nice. "You idiot!" Boom. But yeah, it's good for a laugh.
Did you ever see that movie, The Kennedys? That's another one that I don't necessarily agree with how they portrayed everything, but I thought it was a decent representation.
Yeah. I mean,
but
it's a crazy dynamic with that family for sure.
yeah, well, the mom, yeah, like in that movie, they show in the later years where the mom is basically trying to get revenge on him because of all the womanizing and all the things he did.
Just so much triumph and tragedy in one family. It's crazy,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is very much like a Greek tragedy overall, everything that happened. But anyway, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
but
sorry to
yeah,
sidetrack you there.
no, that's fine. No, hey, it's all part of the deal, man. Those are the public impressions of history.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we have those things all simultaneously going on. We've got the Castro plots going on, we've got the election going on, and we've got this big issue. So I think that Giancana, another reason why it's questionable that he might even help them is that he was known to hold a grudge. But after his public treatment by Robert Kennedy, that grudge I would think was well developed. And I'm not so sure that he would be inclined to use all his efforts to help men who publicly incited and questioned him. And I doubt that Giancana was foolish enough to believe they'd actually hold up a bargain with him that could never be proven.
Right, and then you have all the business with Judith. What was her name? Judith
Exner, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. So they might be. I've heard people suggest that it was Giancana that like pursued her because he wanted a connection with JFK, but to me that doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, he could have any woman he wanted at the time because of his status and his, being as rich and powerful as he was. So.
Right. I'm just saying he might have been a little salty when he found out that.
Yeah, he got mad. Well, that's why. Yeah, I think that served two things. You're right about the bugging when the CIA got caught, and the Department of Justice later on had to drop that case because they didn't want to make any connections with the mafia. But I think that he did that for two reasons. I think one, he was mad about the girlfriend, about what was it, Dan Rowan from Laugh-In, that he might have been sleeping with one of his girlfriends, and I think that. So he wanted him bugged, but I think the other reason is because it also is blackmail material in the government.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So, the Mafia podcast repeated the long-held assertion that the Mafia was a pivotal part of the Kennedy win, and this is later used as part of a motive for the Mafia to seek revenge when Robert Kennedy comes after them. The allegation is Giancana helped the Kennedy get elected in Chicago and the surrounding areas of Illinois. However, the Kennedys already had substantial resources, and the daily political machine of Chicago was already their ally. So just these two factors, I think, were the overwhelming portion of the successful campaign. There never has yet been offered verifiable proof of these claims, but they largely rest upon assumptions, in my view. And I think another reason I highly doubt the vast plot of vote influencing would succeed without being exposed is because despite President Eisenhower and Richard Nixon trying to, calm Republicans, others refused to be calm about it and disputed the election's outcome. Nixon's allies pressed, for instance, one of his allies was a guy named Earl Mazzo, who was a media ally, and he alleged suspicious incidents in the New York Herald Tribune. And the press also began to launch public claims of suspicion. We've seen this in the last couple of elections where people don't want to give up right away. They want to fight it publicly. So at the time, one media outlet stated that the election challenges to Kennedy's victories were due to, quote, Republicans making a veritable crusade of undoing the results. Even if the public challenges ultimately failed, party leaders figured they could taint the Kennedy victory, claim he had no mandate for his agenda, galvanize the rank and file, and have winning issue for the upcoming elections. 3 days following the election, Republican Senator Thurston Morton launched bids for recounts and investigations in 11 different states. Just over a week later, Nixon aides were dispatched to conduct investigations of voter irregularities in most of those locations. So that's something you never hear about.
Right.
That this wasn't just, so everybody wasn't just like, oh, okay, well, I guess that's the way it goes. No, this was opposed from the get-go. And if there were all these vast irregularities that people talk about trying to attribute to the mafia, they would have come up. Somebody might have noticed them.
Right.
So I think that it seems a possible serious challenge to the election was mounting. And the Republican Party was able to actually form grand juries. They involved the U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI, and investigations were launched. The results of all those investigations by states and federal officials turned up no major errors or irregularities that would change the overall results. The Republicans' legal suits in Texas and Illinois, which were the two most disputed, the largest prizes electorally, were dismissed. They launched lawsuits in both states and both got dismissed. So And when the dust from all these accusations and the investigation settled, even the claims of the counties Giancana could influence did not provide the major reversals required, nor were any massive effort to rig the vote detected. So I think it's possible Sam Giancana, yes, he could have influenced those counties, but could he have influenced those counties with no trace of anything? Could he have influenced those counties and orchestrated all that to happen with all those different people and nobody said a thing? I don't think that's possible.
Well, I mean, you know how you can plant a seed or plant several seeds.
Oh yeah, you want it to go a certain way, and I think that that's possible. But
verbally,
I don't.
You know,
think this
he spread the word. You know, da 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 da.
Oh yeah. Well, no. But what I'm saying though is that now we have a third party. It's not just Giancana versus the normal system. It's Giancana, the system trying to protect itself, and now the Republicans trying to reverse the vote. Right. So if they can link the Kennedys with the mafia, they're going to do it.
Yeah.
So I don't think Giancana was that savvy to have, even if he planted a seed, I don't think the people he had on the ground were smart enough or had the ability to launch such a large conspiracy politically without getting caught. I mean, you had arrests, and we knew Daley was corrupt.
Yeah.
But I just, like I said, I don't think if it did happen, I think it was a minor thing, and I think that it wasn't the big major thing or pivotal as a lot of people try to paint it. And I don't think it's enough to be a motive to want, did they really, like I said earlier, did a mafia don who is very wily and I would assume cunning to rise to the top of the mafia really think he was going to rely on the word of a singer's friend who is a politician? I mean, Joe Kennedy was noted to be untrustworthy. Yeah. I just don't think that Giancana was going to take it seriously. Anyway.
Let's jump to the other thing about Giancana that makes him suspicious, and that would be his death and the timing.
Oh yes, no. I see. That's where I actually agree. I think with at least some of what the Mafia podcast said and what we've discussed about it before. I don't believe in the as we've gone over with the Beep Beep Richie episode. I don't think you do either. I don't believe in the massive list of suspicious deaths.
Right.
Where they're just killing. Yeah, but I think there are, at least in my opinion, 5 that would qualify. I think the biggest thing for us to put anyone on a suspicious death list that unfortunately a lot of people don't follow is it should be a murder. It should be an obvious murder in most cases.
Right.
And the problem is with a lot of the suspicious deaths is it's not. It's lone accidents. It's things that could be considered suspicious, but there is no other evidence to support that they're suspicious, so you're just guessing. And unless you have a coroner's report and you can show reasons why it's wrong, I'm going to have to go with the coroner.
Right.
So, but for Giancana, there's so much suspicion to be had. I can't understand why anyone would think that it's not related in some way. So the thing is, for those who don't know the story, Giancana was murdered inside of his house/compound in the basement while he was cooking. He obviously knew whoever his murderer was because he let them in, and they were alone. He turned around to start cooking. The person shot him in the head and then shot him repeatedly in the mouth, which is usually a Sicilian calling card for someone who talked, who shouldn't have.
Right.
Giancana was due to testify to Congress again about criminal acts and questions about the JFK case. Right. Anyway, that is what largely was assumed to be on the docket. And he was murdered, shortly before then, days before, I believe, maybe a week. But so that definitely is suspicious.
Yeah, and I would
Now,
also say that another one of your probably five suspect deaths surrounding this would have to be Johnny Rosselli as well.
yep,
Um,
yeah, finding him dismembered floating in the bay in Florida.
yeah, I have an article here from 1977. It says shortly after Johnny Rosselli testified before a Senate committee that he had participated in CIA plots to kill Castro, a Washington friend asked him if he wasn't afraid for his life. The 70-year-old mafia figure appeared unconcerned. Who'd want to kill an old man like me? He asked, before he was fished out of a 55-gallon oil drum from Dumbfounding Bay and found Mr. Rosselli's body stuffed inside. There was no shortage of suspects ranging from the CIA to Cuban agents or the mafia itself.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Well, one of a little just interesting, side note about Roselli was he had always told his sister that if he went missing to go looking for him in an airport parking lot. And they went to an airport parking lot, and that's actually where they found his car, because that's what the mafia would do.
Right.
You wouldn't find a car usually for a while if they just parked it in long-term parking and left it.
Right. Right. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I mean, and he did actually testify. So that's a little different between Giancana and Rosselli. Rosselli actually got to testify. Um,
Yeah,
and
and it is. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
oh no, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and it is it once again. We get to that Goydian knot of different possibilities. It's either perhaps a connection to political assassinations, being Castro or JFK. Perhaps it's a connection to his criminal past. Why he was killed, I suppose, that is, but it's definitely a suspicious death. It definitely qualifies. It's those, in the 1980s supposed suspicious deaths.
Yeah.
When they've just had so long, and there was, like with Roselli, I don't think if Roselli was going to testify, he probably would have been killed at that time. He might have been killed later,
Right.
but I don't think he necessarily would have been killed at that time if he wasn't eminently going to possibly reveal something. And to me, that doesn't reek of CIA, because I would think the CIA, which goes back into just what the reasons why I doubt, Lyndon Johnson had anything to do with it, and a lot of the major people that try to claim had anything to do with it. There's a lot easier ways to do this than public executions.
Right.
Public execution to me means an emotional attachment. It means there's a message being sent. And that's why I think this case becomes so difficult, is because that opens all of the suspects. Because you got like this mafia podcast that basically tries to encapsulate it within just Giancana, just Marcello, just Trafficante. It had to have been those three. But when you really look at it, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Then you've got all the Cuban exiles and their leaders. Then you've got all the associated criminals, people like Beckham and others. You've got paramilitary people. There's just such a wide swath of possibilities, and they're all interconnected and overlaid on top of each other.
Yeah. Now, also in this article, there was another, I guess, viewpoint as far as why Giancana was killed, and it says this: Mr. Giancana was killed because he tried to reassert his authority in Chicago after a 10-year absence. Sam thought nothing had changed, but everything had changed, the mafia figure said. The task of killing Roselli proved difficult because he was a cautious man. Nevertheless, his pursuers were persistent. They would watch his movements for a couple weeks, leave him alone for a few months, then go back and watch him some more, the mafia figure said. Roselli was careful, but nobody can be that careful. When the decision is made to hit you, you're dead, no matter how long it takes. So,
Yeah, I don't think that is definitely within the realm of possibility for both of them. With Giancana, that actually makes a lot of sense, because that is one of the big problems that was going on, is even after he had basically been shunted out as boss and went down to Mexico, he was still trying to influence things with Richard Kane and other people that he had, that he should have left alone if he was really retiring. I mean, he was basically forced into retirement.
yeah, and further on in this article, when they're talking about when the mafia was watching him, Roselli, that is, It says the only known instances where he deviated from his pattern, according to Miami authorities, were when he had dinner with Santos Trafficante Jr., boss
Hmm.
of mafia rackets in Florida, and the one major underworld figure with whom Mr. Roselli maintained close contact in his last years. The two
Yeah.
dined together for the last time at the Landings restaurant in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, on July 16th, 12 days before Roselli was murdered.
Hmm.
Authorities believe it was a member of the Trafficante organization who was able to lure Mr. Roselli to his death.
I don't doubt that either. And then something that's interesting, I'll have to I'll find the article and I'll add it and throw it into the references. But I did a little bit of digging into that area, and that is true. He did meet and have dinner with Roselli roughly around then. He still was in contact with him. But the one of the problems that police ran into when they were investigating Roselli's death is there were actually possible suspects that were Cuban exiles, which would have had another association with Trafficante.
Right.
That
Let me add this from this. Okay, that they're interviewing an unnamed mafia figure. Okay,
Mhm.
for this story, and it says on July 28th, Roselli and his sister ate late brunch. Then at 12:50, he left in her car, a silver '75 Chevy Impala. He gave no hint of having an appointment, and she assumed he would be back soon. What happened then was described by the unnamed mafia figure. Mr. Roselli drove to a marina and went aboard a private boat where he was received by two men, one an old friend and the other a visitor from Chicago. The boat put off, and a third man on shore drove the Roselli car to the Miami International Airport where it was later found. While Mr. Roselli was sipping a glass of vodka, the man from Chicago grabbed him from behind and held his hand tightly over Roselli's nose and mouth until he was asphyxiated. Not a difficult feat because Roselli had emphysema. Within an hour after he got on the boat, he was dead, the mafia figure said. Aboard the boat was an empty metal drum with a number of holes cut in it so it would fill with water and sink. The body was then stuffed into a drum. A cannon washcloth was taped tightly over Roselli's mouth to make sure he was dead. Then his legs were sawed off so that the body could be stuffed into the drum. To lift the body into the oil drum, the men tied a rope around his neck and stuck a tow hook into each side of his abdomen just under the ribs. While one man hoisted the body with the rope, the other lifted with the two hooks. And when the torso was finally lowered into the drum, the legs were stuffed in around it, and heavy chains were laced through the holes in the drum, around the body, and over the lid of the drum. But the drum had not been weighted enough, and 10 days later, three fishermen spotted it on the edge of a sandbar beside a 28-foot deep canal. They suspected a body might be inside and called the police. The murder was the final step in a long slide from Mr. Roselli's zenith as the Mafia's Las Vegas ambassador, an impeccably well-dressed ladies' man who was deferred to by everyone on the strip. So how is that for a murder?
Yeah. Yeah. Roselli was definitely the point man, and he was the original person that Robert Mayhew approached when they were first putting together the association. He was, the one who brought Giancana and Trafficante to eventually meet other officials of the CIA at a hotel.
Yeah. Whew, that's craziness.
Yeah. So I definitely think he and Giancana both qualify. And those, to me, I mean, yeah, it's the circumstances, it's the manner of death, because it's much harder to prove, that I'm sure we've gone over and talked about a little bit. The only possible one that I think could possibly even be one of the suspicious deaths that could be a suicide is de Morenchill. And I don't even necessarily think it took more than him killing himself. I just think that he was put in such a state and was so nervous and so fearful and so hysterical that he might have been scared into killing himself. And that to me is still suspicious. It's still people putting
possible.
pressure on him.
Yeah.
So anyway,
sure.
yeah. Okay, so jumping back, now I want to talk about a whole bunch of different things. But jumping back onto our topic, so for the one of the proponents in the mafia thing that seems to definitely have been a long-term supporter of the mafia idea after the House Select Committee is G. Robert Blakey, the former counsel. And do you care if one real quick thing I just wanted to throw in more about the election?
No, go ahead.
Blakey said that he believes Sinatra helped, that Frank Sinatra was the point man between Joe Kennedy and, which makes sense. He was friends with, with John. Like I'm saying, it's possible. I just don't think it definitely has the weight, if it happened, that people have put on it. And I think that, I think Sinatra might have helped him, but I think once again, you got people that aren't necessarily going to be the most reliable in getting this stuff done. So I think notably it's the Republicans, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and the FBI investigations that were ongoing. That's another thing that bothered me is the Armory Lounge. They have it bugged, but Giancana never mentions anything in his base when he doesn't know that it's bugged.
Well,
I mean, it's all possible.
a lot of
I'm
these
not saying
guys probably had an idea that their place was bugged.
I think sometimes, but I think with that one, they caught him on other stuff via that one, I believe. So I don't think he knew right then. I think he might have learned in the later 60s it was bugged, but I don't think he knew in 59 and 60.
Yeah, it's possible. It's possible.
Yeah. So I also think, one of the reasons why, people might say, well, then if the FBI had the information, why didn't they expose it? And I would say that I would think that's because they had illegally gathered a lot of it, is why the FBI wouldn't expose it. But I think the Republicans would have. And I think they're the biggest problem in that idea.
Yeah.
So another reason why I think that people have tried to suggest that the mafia were responsible for the failure of the Bay of Pigs, and I think that definitely is a possibility, but probably less so for the mafia, more for the exiles. That the exiles were the ones who really lost out on that, even though the mafia did lose, roughly eventually what would be billions on all of their casinos and all of their holdings that they lost.
Yeah.
But one of the problems I had with the Mafia podcast was they said that JFK promised air support and then denied it. JFK never promised air support. That's one of the things that maybe has just been changed over time, just people retelling the story. But JFK didn't want any U.S. troops used, or at least he wanted them hidden, having any sort of association even with training with the U.S. because he knew that could spark a war.
Yeah, I think the generals might have promised air support.
Yeah, exactly. I could see that happening.
Yeah.
So, another one of the problems with the mafia killing JFK to get one of the things that they offered, was it might be a way to get rid of Robert F. Kennedy. But I think that in the wake of a tragedy, as we did see happen, the new president was not just going to fire all the appointments made by JFK, and that would include their greatest enemy, RFK.
Right.
And, I think Bobby Kennedy, as we know, he did serve in the Johnson administration for a time. He eventually had to leave because him and Johnson could never get along. But
it did put the brakes on Kennedy going after the mafia.
That is true. It slowed him down. So, and he definitely, just his mental state, because some of his advisors were talking about how he felt like, he was so depressed and he didn't really want to do anything.
Right.
So I definitely, no matter what happened, that definitely, it did neutralize him in that way. It slowed down his prosecutions. But I think that's why they might have had a part of it. I just don't necessarily think that they were the prime mover.
Right.
They knew that they could benefit from it, but I think to a smaller extent is what they would have, been in charge of. So I would also note that Giancana was very cunning and had climbed to the heights of a criminal empire. So we should factor in that. I just don't think it's it's such an easy proposition as people have tried to make it.
Well, let's talk about another.
I was going to actually jump to the House Select Committee if you want to. Oh,
okay. Well, I was just going to mention real quick. We were talking about Bobby Kennedy, being a thorn in the side of the mafia.
Yeah.
He was a very big thorn in the side to Carlos Marcello.
Oh yes.
Trying to have him deported. He was in fact in court on November 22nd, 1963, fighting deportation.
And that to me, I think that is a double-edged sword. That this idea that suspecting the mafia, because so some people would say, okay, well that gives him a motive to want to do it, but what that also does is focus a huge amount of public attention on him.
Yeah. And we also have that quote. Okay, what's that quote?
They cut the dog's
head off and the tail stops wagging.
Yeah. But once again, unsourced.
Right.
People say he said it. And that's the whole problem, I think, largely in dealing with any of these. I don't think it was a lot of the big figures, because the big figures, I mean, that's just the natural evolution of the story. But over time, people add in all this mystique and, the drama, the high drama that you saw between, Giancana and Kennedy. I think they try to add it to all these various characters. And it sounds really awesome if he said something like that, but no one really can pin down when he said it or where he said it.
Yeah, I just think a lot of the mystique comes from, okay, these guys were rich,
Yep.
powerful,
Mm-hmm.
and they were being fucked with hardcore by the Kennedys.
Oh, yeah.
And for them not to meet or come to some kind of a consensus to say, okay, let's do something about this shit already. Enough
Well,
is enough.
I think they were, though. And I understand. I'm not saying, that isn't usually the selection of most mobsters, but I think that they realized they were in a precarious position, especially Marcello, because Marcello, he got, Kennedy didn't just try to deport him; he succeeded once. I mean, it eventually got overturned, and he was allowed to stay. He didn't have to leave permanently, but they dragged. Because I can't remember if it was Guatemala. It was a South American country. It might have been Guatemala, but Marcello said that he was.
Ferry allegedly go pick him up, and bring him back?
Oh, that's what people say. I think somebody did, definitely. But yeah, they actually seized him. What they did is they waited for him to go to meet his parole officer, and then 2 federal agents grabbed him, threw him into a truck,
dropped him off
threw
in the
him onto a
jungles of
plane.
Guatemala.
Yeah, exactly. And then dropped him into the jungle with his, yeah.
I mean, that would piss me off,
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Talk about being inconvenienced and then trying to have to find your way back with, no identification, nothing valid. They're saying you're a citizen of that country. You shouldn't be in the United States. Yeah. I'm sure that.
Imagine you're a mafia don and you take that kind of humiliation.
The total greatest, disrespect, which is, like I said, I definitely think they have motives to be involved, but I think the timing makes it less likely that they were going to definitely do something where it would be directly come back on them. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because,
I'm just saying, it's not out of the realm of possibility
that
some of the money came from these guys to facilitate the job.
Even if, I wouldn't even rule out, I'd say that it's even possible for them to have a direct hand in some of the action. I just don't think that they were the prime movers in the assassination.
No, I think it was an idea that was a consensus between a lot of parties, and it was just agreed upon to possibly, what's the word I'm looking for? Compartmentalize certain aspects of things as far as acquiring shooters, financing things, planning things, and all this and that and the other,
And necessarily, like I said, it can be, it's got to be to a certain part compartmentalized, and it has to be a small group overall. But yeah, who knew and who didn't? Who was used wittingly? Who was used unwittingly?
Because I think a lot of the planning for this and involving the use of Lee Harvey Oswald in this conspiracy happened in New Orleans.
It's possible.
And when you think about what was going on then, you think about the people that he had around him. And I mean, who knows if Beckham was telling the truth, but if Beckham was telling the truth, he curried plans and photos to Dallas that he obtained from G. Ray Gill's office, who was Marcello's lawyer. And there was a representative from the Marcello family there. One of his nephews or his sons, Victor. And this is what Beckham is saying. So is it out of the realm of possibility that somehow, the financing came from this, if Beckham can be trusted and is telling his truth? Which I don't know why he would lie.
No,
and tell his outrageous
money.
Story. Yeah, but he didn't get it.
Oh yeah, no, I understand that, but I mean, we've seen that with people like David Lewis and others too. I'm not ruling out Beckham because I know something about him, but a lot more about him. But I just think we have to be very skeptical.
Yeah, I just think it's funny that for the Garrison grand jury, he didn't say a word when everybody is still alive and around, and then for the HSCA, his what's it called? For his
Was it security testimony or immunized?
Immunized testimony. He's going to tell this fantastical, seemingly all of a sudden truthful thing. Okay, and nothing came of it. Nothing at all came of it. Now
Yeah, most.
Delsa wanted to dig deeper, but by then the funding had been cut off, and 30 years later, Beckham's going to write a book telling the exact same story.
Yeah. Well, and two, I mean, unfortunately, with the HSCA, they kind of ran into the same problems the other investigations did. Too many leads, and then you've got, which ones are the verifiable ones. You got people like Viciana and others just dropping whole cloth stuff in between things that actually happened. So they're trying to figure out what's true, what's not.
Yeah, I mean, 'cause, look, I found a file from the HSCA from LJ Delsa of questions that he was going to ask Beckham, and there was like 50 questions in this file that he had lined up to ask Beckham and question him on as a follow up to his testimony. Never happened.
Yeah, and I guarantee that unfortunately that wasn't the only time in all these investigations.
Right, and nobody would have heard about it until the 90s when some of the stuff started coming out.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, his motives seem questionable about why he would say something like that, but it's just I don't know. I
Well,
go
no,
back
and
and
I'm not.
forth
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, exactly, and
because
that's what
some
we're going to
things
have to do. Yeah.
he gets dead on right that we can prove,
Mm-hmm.
and then the other stuff we have no way of proving or disproving. So he's an interesting character for sure. That's what keeps drawing me right back into that son bitch. But and the fact that he's still alive
Yeah.
and won't talk now. So
Well, same thing with Richard Gibson. Same. I even found the thing with the guy who or the pseudonym was Cassison, but Jacques Richardson, the guy who considered using Oswald. He's alive in France. He's not going to respond.
no.
But yeah, there's just people who are actually definitely related to this case that would be easy just for the officials to ask a few questions or release a few things. But I think it's only by chance that we've actually gotten the information we have in some cases. There's just so much, even they can't know what's in everything.
Right.
So it's just about getting anyway. So I'll jump back. Anyway, so the House Select Committee that G. Robert Blakey served as the chief counsel for determined on the basis of evidence available that President Kennedy had died as a result of a conspiracy. However, they were largely unable to prove who aided or used Oswald to do so. Additionally, the HSCA did not believe but could not rule out that the mafia or a criminal syndicate was responsible, according to its prior report. The HSCA states, quote, the committee believed the National Syndicate of Organized Crime as a group was not involved in the assassination, but evidence does not preclude this possibility. Thus, it's not unreasonable to support that the mafia played a role. However, that would not infer that they played the most pivotal role that includes the planning and execution of the assassination. In fact, the manner of the assassination is contrary to the overwhelmingly violent and obvious actions that usually characterize the criminal syndicate. The assassination, I would contend, more resembled a military or intelligence operation. First, the sniper or snipers were concealed, as where the mafia likes to find a suitable, expendable shooter that can be easily identified and blamed if they are seen undertaking the violent act. Instead, we have no definitive evidence of that shooter, and this has left the enduring questions, and most criminal acts are revealed long before decades have passed in a neat package to not attract undue attention to the mafia's leaders. Additionally notable is the close similarities between the suggestions in a study of assassination, which we've referred to as the Assassination Guide before on the show, and this CIA guide to assassinating people and the best weapons and dupes for use in an operation lines up rather closely with what actually occurred in Dealey Plaza. So when the CIA conspired with the mafia and Cuban exiles to kill Castro, these secrets might have been slipped or even been taught to related individuals, and that expands the ability of various people to use the agency's tactics and by virtue of this connect more official groups to the matter, whether they had a direct hand in the events or not. So
Have you ever read Blakey's book, Fatal Hour?
no, how is it? I usually, like I said, I go to you and Chuck to find out about most of these books. I'm usually just reading files.
Yeah, I haven't read it. I was just wondering if you had or not. Well, he lays out in more detail, in his opinion, Um, the Assassination of Kennedy by Organized Crime is what the subtitle's called. And he concludes that the president's murder was planned and carried out by Marcello and conspirators. It says their book lays out evidence that has been corroborated by additional sources and official records released in subsequent years.
Yeah, I'm sure he makes a decent case for it too. It's just, to me, the problem is that, okay, so I mean, if you want to look into the Marcello aspect of it, we do have early life connections of Marcello to Lee Harvey Oswald and his family. We do have Dutz, his uncle Dutz Moret, who was a low-level bookie, who was working, I believe, for Sam Saya, who was a lieutenant of Marcello. And we also, I don't know if it was Saya or another gentleman, but we had a supposed, alleged romantic relationship between Oswald's mother and a different Marcello gang member when they were younger.
Right.
So, but those are basically the only two connections, and Oswald himself never really has any direct relation to any mafia people, nor besides Moret is ever seen in the company of mafia people. So I think that's largely overblown and what a lot of people try to begin the story on. It's possible, but I just don't. You don't see people. They're going to be seen together. You know what I mean? Especially when the lockstep FBI surveillance started to kick in, not only on Giancana but Trafficante, Roselli, and Marcello. It wasn't going to be as easy with Marcello because Marcello was actually a little more wily than the others. But they're still going to see, at some point, Oswald would have been seen with criminals.
Well, I mean, and you can jump over to Ruby too. I mean,
see, that's where I'm totally behind a mafia plot. I'm all on board with Ruby being used because we can get the evidence for that.
Right. Because I mean, it says Ruby had ties to Marcello and Ruby. It says
and Giancana.
Yeah, and Joseph Campisi was one of Marcello's lieutenants.
Like you said earlier, too, Trafficante. So we got Ruby all over the board.
Possible ties to David Ferry.
Yeah, so that's possible, but I definitely think the others. I mean, we don't even need Ferry and the things we can't prove. We can prove that there's at least another person that I think isn't brought up very often that I talk about in my book is Meyer Lansky. When Ruby, the one time we can show for sure that he went to Cuba, that we can track that he was sent tickets and money by Louis McWillie, who was a pit boss and was a card dealer in one of the Havana casinos that was owned by Meyer Lansky. Or Lansky was one of the main investors, and his brother Jake Lansky actually met with McWillie and Ruby while he was there on vacation. Yeah. So we know for sure that there's a link between him and one of the most powerful mobsters in history. Then you add in that we then have the possible likely links of him, Trafficante being there, linked back to Chicago with at least two hitmen that the commission found and just didn't make a big deal about, which would be, to me, a direct link with the mafia. Right. But if those two hitmen aren't good enough for you, then we've also got them linked to Jake Lansky, we've got them linked to McWillie, and the other mafia bosses. And his action, to me, definitely infers. I mean, as we know, people such as those who support the official story have often tried to say, well, he was just, they try to make the excuse, well, he felt bad and wanted to avenge John Kennedy, or he was doing it for Jackie, didn't want to have to go through it. That's all ridiculous. There's no evidence of any of that. Ruby is not some patriot who decided, well, today I'm going to go and kill this guy because it's the right thing to do. And, they say it was a crime of passion. It was an act, he had to go do it, which isn't true either. Because if Ruby was acting as a man, if it was a crime of passion, if he was just acting, he saw it and he couldn't take it anymore, he had seen Oswald multiple times. He impersonated a member of the press for the Friday night press conference. So he could have killed him that whole day.
He could have killed him there. He could have got him in the hallway.
Yeah, he waited. He waited until he knew that there'd be an opening and he could deliver a shot that hopefully would kill him. And he didn't want to hit anybody else. He had orders. He had to kill just Oswald.
Right, which would lend credence to the theory, okay, well, if the mafia is ordering Ruby to silence Oswald, what's the reason? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, to me, I think it's a conglomerate plot. That's why
Right.
my idea is a conglomerate plot where you have either a rogue member of the military intelligence establishment or a former member working possibly with someone from the mafia or a Cuban exile leader. And the Cuban exiles and the military style plot is likely due to military people, so they do all the planning, but they need it to not be connected to Oswald's death. So what do? You use the mafia to kill him because who's going to believe that a military exile mafia plot happened?
Right.
That to me seems so much more improbable and so much more easier to hide and it's disjointed and it's compartmentalized. So there's only maybe a person or two in each group that would even have to know. And that's it. Nobody knows. You kill off who you have to kill off afterwards. The end.
Yeah, because you never know if Oswald would have talked and
Yeah.
named names. Well, then they're going to go after these guys, and if they talk and they name names, and then
Mm-hmm.
they talk and they name names, well,
So it all
eventually
needs
it's
to
going
be
to
cut
go
off
back
at
up the
Oswald.
ladder. Yeah. Nip
And
it in
then
the
we have
bud.
the FBI and the CIA obliging. 48 to 72 hours later, from the documents that we've gone over, the FBI and the CIA were already closing the case. It was all Oswald at the end because they didn't want to ask the bigger questions because they were so disturbing.
Right. Now let me read this little thing to you. You ever read the book Mob Lawyer by Frank Regano?
I've read portions because, yeah, I actually cited some of the stuff that he said, yeah.
Yeah, it revealed that he relayed a message in 1963 from Jimmy Hoffa to Carlos Marcello and Trafficante, the mafia boss of Florida, urging the two mafia bosses to kill Kennedy. So this is coming from Hoffa, allegedly. Regano later revealed that 4 days before Trafficante died, the mob boss admitted to Regano how he and Marcello organized the murder of President Kennedy.
Yeah, I heard that. Once again, it's possible. But I really, like I said, I think that where we can find agreement with some of the things that the Mafia podcast was saying is in Ruby. Because Ruby to me seems clear. I mean, people have just so much. For instance, one of the things that I know that I found that, something I was very happy to show to people who don't support that a conspiracy is possible is J. Edgar Hoover lied to the Warren Commission and every other official, but Ruby was a very useless informant, but he was an FBI informant for a short time.
Right.
So that right there, you've got them. I think what ultimately might have happened in this instance is, and it was actually, talking to you and Chuck Ocelli and, people like, Bill Simpich and Larry Hancock and others trying to figure this out. I think what could have happened is, because there's so many, aspersions of suspicion all over the place on all these different groups. I think it's possible that Oswald might have been unwittingly used by more than one official group. And then it was just a question of, okay, we might not have done this directly, but our fingerprints are on him.
Right.
And if anybody notices our fingerprints on him, they're going to think we did it. So we just need to bury everything under such a pile that no one will ever figure out what happened. And I think that's because I mean, you see when he's in Russia, you've got him running into Schneider, CIA, running into CIA source, McMillan Johnson. You've got him running in, Richard Gibson is CIA, another CIA agent that's telling people that he's one of us, he's one of the FPCC. You've got mobsters. You've got all these people doing all these different things. And I think that once enough groups had touched him, all the groups basically agreed at the end, okay, well, it's just all got to be buried because we can't come out being connected to him.
Right. Which kind of figures into this theory. Marcello admitted his involvement to two other inmates during a fit of rage in a prison yard at the Federal Correction Institute in Texarkana, Texas in 1985. Marcello bragged to prison cellmate and FBI informant, Jack Van Lanningham, and recorded on FBI wiretaps that he ordered the hit on Kennedy, masterminded the assassination, and planted red herrings to confuse the press, embarrass the FBI and CIA into suppressing evidence that would have revealed illegal covert U.S. operations in Cuba. Marcello arranged for two hitmen to carry out the assassination after entering the United States from Canada and Europe, set up Oswald as the fall guy, and ordered the subsequent murder of various conspirators, mobsters, and witnesses who risked turning informant, including Roselli and Giancana. Which seems like a little bit of a stretch, but you see where I'm going with the
Yeah.
embarrassing the FBI and CIA into suppressing evidence that would have revealed further plots.
Well, yeah, and we know that Giancana did that because of his direct involvement. With Marcello, I'm not so sure that he would have because I don't think they used him for anything. So I think that could have been done by Giancana or Trafficante. But another thing I wanted to mention about Giancana, which makes it, at the time, not only was Marcello involved in a legal fight with the American government, so was Giancana. Giancana said that the lockstep surveillance of him in the summer of '63 was illegal and it was a violation of his civil rights, and he eventually won the case.
Right.
But they still followed him. So he had a lot of attention on him too. The only person that really didn't have he still had people, federal agents coming after him, but the only person that wasn't actively in a legal suit with him was Trafficante.
Right.
So I think that makes it more likely he might be a key person if we're looking at it, and he actually might have had the contact with Ruby, and Lansky is connected. Trafficante seems to be the prime mover as far as the mafia goes besides Lansky, in Cuba, as where Giancana and Marcello are part of it. Trafficante seems to be more the guy that has the connections with the Cuban exiles. He's the one who can speak Spanish. He's the one who's down there dealing with people.
Yep. He just happens to be in prison with a guy who wiretaps embassies for the CIA, and these what Doug calls these gunboat cowboys like Lauren Hall, who were these extreme right wing
the paramilitary Sturgis guys like that.
Yeah. He's got ties to these guys, and there's a lot of time in prison to sit around and do a little planning and talking, and who knows,
Yeah, no, I think that that's all possible, but I don't, like I said, I don't necessarily believe that they were the ones behind the assassination, but I do definitely support that they were the ones who used Ruby. And with Ruby, people talk about, well, why would he do it? He could have owed a favor.
He
probably didn't have
to say, hey, if you don't do this, we're going to kill your sister.
Exactly. And that to me makes a lot more sense than an overly intricate military style plot that the mob was responsible for.
Yeah, telling him, hey, you've had a good life, old Jack buddy. It's time to pay the piper.
Exactly. We need you to. No matter what happens, you need to kill this guy. Take your time. Make sure it gets done. And that's it. And that
I could have even convinced his dumb ass that he would come out of this smelling like a hero.
Yeah, or that he would have got off because the American public wouldn't have allowed him to be convicted.
Right. I mean, I could see that happening. I don't think Jack Ruby was the brightest bulb in the drawer.
No.
I mean, he was cunning for sure, but but I don't see him as. I could see him being easily convinced that he might have not been put on death row for this.
And as far as I'm concerned, anyone that has just a basic look at the evidence, you're going to see that whole claim of he was doing it for America or for Jackie Kennedy is ridiculous. He wasn't just some befuddled guy who decided he was going to make a difference that day. This is somebody who was acting under orders, because if he was going to act on emotion, he would have just killed him. He didn't. He waited. He waited days. And if you're overcome with emotion, you can't wait days.
Yeah, wasn't there even a tie with David Ferry and Jack Ruby through who was that guy in Chicago that was dating Jean Ace?
I don't know. I didn't know of any. I've heard mentioned, but I don't know of anything related to the two of them.
They were looking at Ferry's phone records and Jack Ruby's phone records, and noticed that they were both calling this number in Chicago. It was this woman's apartment, but the guy she was dating was using her apartment as like his phone where he could be reached, I guess.
I would think too that Ferry might have access to some of Marcello's contacts, just even as the assistant in this case.
Right, and we know Ruby was going to New Orleans, to get dancers, and I'm sure there was some kind of a little circuit going on, okay, you put a girl in a club down there for 2 months, then you move her over to Texas for
Yeah,
a couple months, then you bring her back to a different club in New Orleans. You know what I mean?
and we definitely can prove at the very least that we have, the people that I think definitely is much more telling is his association with the Campeses. That they are basically the leaders of the mafia locally in Dallas.
And that's where
They're
he
the
last ate dinner the night before he shot Oswald.
And then the day after he kills Oswald, one of the Campeses comes and visits him in jail and has a private conversation with him that the police allow.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is highly suspect.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is strange that he would eat there the night before, and then they would come and visit the day after.
Yeah.
And that to me smacks. That's where I would agree with Blakey. A lot of people want to put the mafia on the main part of the plot, which I can't agree with. But for this, oh yeah, this all smacks of a lovely setup where they used an expendable guy to get rid of another expendable guy.
Yeah.
And, that's the best way, I think, too, to keep the plot. I think that if it were, rogue official, Cuban exiles, paramilitary people, whoever exactly set up the plot and carried it out, the best way to keep it from ever getting out is to then compartmentalize the plot to just you, and then you just set up via one other person who is either gotten rid of later or could keep their mouth shut to deal with the mafia, and they take care of Ruby, and nobody knows who's involved in either. So no one from either plot knows what's going on.
Right. And possibly, Ruby was used for some things that happened in Dallas.
Yeah, it's possible.
Because he did have a good in with a lot of the Dallas cops who frequented his establishment, and Ruby would
And
kiss their ass, give
and
them
I think
free
that made
drinks,
him. Yeah, you're right, and I think that made him perfect
employ
because
their
there weren't a lot of
wives.
criminals.
Yeah.
Yeah, there weren't a lot that could operate so easily in police presence.
Right.
Even the commission found out that he had I believe they called it a relationship that was greater than the average citizen. Because he knew hundreds.
Oh
I
yeah.
think it was something like 52. Yeah, he knew a lot of people on the police force and auxiliary officers. He even had one, I believe, was an auxiliary officer that did some bouncing for him at one of his clubs.
Yeah. And spoiler alert, the next time your boy, is going to be on the Midnight Rider News Show in June, I'm going to be talking about this very subject. So make sure you tune into that and be looking for it, folks.
I'll definitely check it out. We'll get it up on the MG. But yeah, I totally agree with you, and I think we can agree with as where I disagree with some of the other things they said. I definitely agree. Ruby has all the makings of a mafia dupe, of just somebody who was told he was going to have to do something. Be careful about it. Because imagine if he was the person that officials tried to paint him as, he would have run in right away, tried to shoot at Oswald, and probably not killed him. Or probably,
Right.
when he brandished the gun right in front of everyone, might have been wrestled away before he got anything done. He needed
might have had a little nervous jitters, and
yeah,
he was putting it off until he just couldn't put it off anymore.
yeah,
Because he knew once the county got a hold of him, he'd be in county jail, and that was that. He didn't have any more Dallas police ins, I guess you would say.
yeah. Well, and something that's always struck me as interesting that you and I have discussed before that I think a lot of people might not be aware of is that in he had with the police, which allowed him to actually get to Oswald at that last moment before Oswald was basically locked up and out of his reach. People always say, how did he get into a secret side door, all this stuff. But according to the original testimony of Patrick Dean, one of the police officers that was there, he saw Ruby. He saw Ruby walk right past him, and he didn't say a thing. Because Ruby was always around. He had brought them sandwiches a couple days before. So Ruby just strolled right in, got into position, and that was it. And it was over. And then he just wouldn't open his mouth, which is another trait of the mafia, usually back in that time anyway. Not anymore, but...
Right. He hinted around at some things, but yeah, he never did give up the mafia, so to speak.
Yeah. And to me, that it makes a lot more sense for Ruby's use, and that also, like I said, compartmentalizing the plot in that way. I mean, what better way to keep a secret than even the people who are doing it don't exactly know everything that's going on.
Yeah, and he even begged Earl Warren, "Look, get me out of Dallas, and I'll tell you everything you want to know." And they wouldn't do it
Nope.
because he knew if he opened
I
his
don't.
mouth in jail, in prison, in Texas, he was dead.
Yeah. I think unfortunately the commission lacked, and a lot of officials did, but unfortunately they lacked the imagination to understand what they might be dealing with. They really thought they had a handle on everything, and like I said, unfortunately, were informed by people like the FBI and the CIA, who had concluded in 72 hours or less that it was just Oswald. Let's move on.
Right? Yeah, or maybe they didn't even want to hear the truth at that point, because they
Yeah,
knew where it would lead.
bigger
And
questions.
it
Yeah.
would have opened up even more of Pandora's box.
Oh, I mean, yeah, even Dulles. That's the one thing, for a lot of people try to paint Dulles as the mastermind, and I don't agree with that because of various reasons. But the thing I do agree with is the reason the Warren Commission was compromised, and why, to me, I can't understand why anyone would say it wasn't, is because of Alan Dulles, because he was the person who signed off on the original Castro plots. He was the one who opened Pandora's box and introduced the mafia into the situation.
Yeah, and he knew all this, and he was the
And he
only
didn't
one
say,
that knew all this on the commission.
I didn't say a thing to the rest of the commissioners. So that's why when people always talk about how evil the Warren Commission is, I don't agree. I think a lot of those guys got used. I think a lot of those guys didn't realize, Dulles was the only one who knew all that. So all the rest of those people had no ability to know that was going on.
Right.
So I don't blame all of them for him lying. I blame him.
Right. All right, my friend. Well, I think we're about an hour and a half into this. Is there anything we didn't get to that you wanted to hit on?
Well, I think we covered, we talked about Marcello's background. We talked about, the early life and some of the things with Giancana. And I think with Trafficante, we covered his Cuban connections and everything down there. So I think we covered all of that. Hopefully, everybody got some interesting information. Like I said, in the reference notes I'm going to send to Rob to attach to it, there'll be the Castro plot. So if you really want to go deeper into there, there's, like I said, I think 15, 20 or more different documents, some of them from the new releases that people can go into, and you can really get into it. You can see how closely linked for a time the mafia and the CIA were. And no, I think we covered pretty much every, we went a little bit of everywhere. We went Johnny Roselli, and like I said, I'm looking forward to listening to see what you say on that the next mafia one you do.
Well, it's not necessarily mafia related. It's just
okay.
It's more
Ruby
of what Ruby was up to in Dallas.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe, a little bit of mafia related.
Yeah. I think he might have been used for a couple other things that would maybe not just silencing Oswald,
Yeah.
But like I said, I'll get into all that in June on the Midnight Writer Show, so be looking out for that. So, Carmine, tell everybody where they can find your stuff again, my friend.
You can find everything at tpoc.com. You can find Neapolis Media Group with links to my stuff and to Rob's stuff and all the members of the Neapolis Media Group. You can find the primary evidence collections. I added a new section, updated it for MLK's 50th, so there's more information on MLK and an additional section there, and I'm going to be doing the same thing for RFK as his 50th is coming up. So yeah, tune in, listen to the shows. You can also find all the shows like the Lone Gunman podcast I've done on there under the author section, and the blog is updated regularly, probably almost every week. So
and you can hear Carmine just about every Thursday night on Ocelli.com.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, and once in a while I'll be going back. Rob hooked me up with the people at Midnight Writer News, so I'll be doing another show there. But I have one that's on, you can find us on YouTube as well, and I have all those shows linked up on our YouTube from the Lone Gunman podcast and other places I've been.
Sweet. Well, my friend, always a pleasure to have you come on the show and astound us with your vast knowledge of the documents.
You're too kind.
Yeah,
I do my best, my friend. I appreciate you having me back, and I hope everyone enjoyed themselves.
Well, I threw you a softball, but you didn't hit it. You just totally missed it.
What? What was the softball?
You were supposed to say, forget about it.
Nice. Hey, you can't be perfect every time, huh?
Golly day.
Hey,
All
this guy over here.
right. There it is, folks. Carmine Savastano. We're talking the mafia. Thank you, Carmine.
Well, buona fortuna to all of our listeners.
Yeah, that means good night. And a lot of money in your pocket, bitches.
Exactly. Good fortune
All
to
right.
you.
Put some bitches in the can, beam up the satellite down directly to your ears, people. This is your boy. Peace.